Hello, hello. Welcome to Costly Conversations. I'm excited because today we're talking to Erica Gaines. Now, she has an interesting organization called TAC Mobility. And if you just kind of skim over the website or check out their social media, you might be inclined to think, okay, is this yoga for cops? But I think we're going to go a little bit deeper and discover that this is a system designed to help create better members of our society, better members of our police forces, and as a byproduct, just a better overall product that we put out there on the streets. And let's go ahead and get into it. And one second, let me make sure we're not muted. There we go. Erica, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, that was a great intro. You're welcome.
Hey, well, I know I missed all the latitudes and platitudes, if I even said that right. All the things that you do. I know you're certified in so many different things, and you've been working with local PDs for a while and doing all sorts of cool stuff. But if you
Yeah.
wouldn't mind kind of filling in some of the gaps of things that people just really should know when looking into you, trying to figure out what it is you do from even as like from a civilian perspective, because a lot of the people who tune in with what we do, they don't, they're not cops. And you've been talking to cops for a little while now. What do you do? Why is it important?
We focus on officer wellness and you said so many different things right there. To people who are not cops looking in on what we do, really our one of like our main missions is to build a healthier law enforcement community because it in turn bleeds onto the community, like for lack of a better word. If you have officers that are well, if you have officers who are rested, who are taking care of themselves when they're responding to our crises, they're going to be better at it. They're going to do a better job. And our the stuff that we're going through, the reasons that we're calling 911 are complex. So we really do need to have people that are responding that are ready and available to handle what it is that we're calling them for. And if you're a police officer and you just kind of stumble upon what we do, it is for sure not yoga for cops. Although I'm super supportive of companies that do that. Really, our main focus when it comes to cops and why they should care is that yes, officer wellness is such a hot topic, and it, like every training is about wellness. If you go to a police conference, there's like 50 different wellness classes to choose from, and a lot of them are focusing on like the mental load and emotionality. But what we do is focus on the body. There's so much tension that gets stored in cops' bodies for I mean, for from duty gear, all the way to you're just burnt out and your jaw muscles are super tense. So we want to help just get rid of some of that physical tension. Like I think that the law enforcement community really minimizes how much chronic pain interrupts your wellness.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I definitely appreciate you trying to break that down, clarifying that it is in fact not yoga for cops. But I have seen you guys utilize certain techniques that one might associate with the stretching world or whatever it is people want to call it, just as an umbrella term. Such as using a tennis ball to relieve some of that tension stored in your hips, and you touched on that in
Yeah.
your brief monologue that like tension gets stored in your body. So
Yeah.
you're like, let's talk about that. Why might somebody be confused if somebody just perused the website?
Because cops can be so fucking dense. Oh, I said the F word. I'm sorry. I told you I wasn't gonna do it. I
just
think
for
that
just for the
cops
first few
are
minutes.
sorry. Tell me when I have a green light on that.
Gotcha.
Um, I feel like cops are so just in their own world of just like tactical stuff. And I think that anytime that there's something outside of that, you're their brains automatically go to something extreme or something like super unfamiliar. So a runner's lunge, I don't know why a runner's lunge means yoga when really we're talking about releasing tension that's in your
Hmm.
hips, your low back, your glutes, your, upper legs and your thighs. Um, and I mean, I did try to get people to do yoga. I am a certified yoga instructor and I find the value. There's a ton of research behind why it's impactful. But I recognize that a lot of the people who are in the law enforcement community are not down.
Hmm.
Not down to be in like child's pose and downward dog, which is
Got you.
fine, but like it's still really useful and highly effective in a short amount of time. And it does so much, not just for your physical health, but also your mental. So I was like, cool. If stretching, if yoga means a bunch of stretches but with a bunch of different language that people aren't used to, or meditation, well, I can just take that out, right? And we can use what's useful. And I think that we can apply that to everything that's unfamiliar. You don't have to
Right.
take everything with it. You just take what's useful and leave the rest.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have an issue specifically with the word yoga because there's a lot of connections with like the Eastern and the mystic and spirituality and stuff like that, and they're just uncomfortable. But if you can take like the clinical benefits, I personally don't see the I guess the conflict where you say like, hey, if we can kind of stretch our glutes, we can actually, studies say, release this amount of tension and have a better overall quality of life. Like, why the heck not? Especially when you look at some of the
Yeah.
statistics. And I mean, let's cut past a lot of this stuff because people, if they look at your website, you're very, very
Yeah.
clear about why you started this overall. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
shocked that you were brave enough to put it in there. Um, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why did you
Okay.
start
Okay.
TAC Mobility?
Uh, I mean, because the relationship that cops have with the majority of Americans is so fractured right now.
Hmm.
And when I was first getting involved with law enforcement, I was for sure like very Black Lives Matter supporting. At the time that I started working with police, I was doing a lot of discovery about myself and my own ethnicity and my heritage and where I came from. And a lot of that really kind of led me down this road of being introduced to police brutality and just a lot of the stuff that's really mainstream when it comes to how people talk about law enforcement, like their involvement with slavery from the past and all this stuff. And it was it then I went through a shooting simulation and it just changed everything about how I was seeing this community and how I was thinking
Hmm.
about this community. And once I put myself in like a fraction of, cops experience, I realized that, well, damn, there is so much more to this side of the story than I ever gave credit to. And at the time, I had made so many relationships with cops that I really felt like I have this opportunity and this privilege to explore these relationships that I've built and ask people like to be vulnerable with me and just let me ask stupid questions. Like I feel
Yeah.
like that's one of the shitty things about like anyone from the outside looking in and asking questions about your community. And it doesn't matter if it's about the police community, the Black community, Asian community, like any community, someone outside looking in asking questions, people become very defensive and we don't
Yeah.
really get anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely a thing. And I because I'm a curious soul, I definitely want to talk to you about probably towards the end of the conversation to not derail that you made a point to mention like you were going through a phase of self discovery of your heritage and ethnicity and all those things, and it kind of like opened your eyes up to what was happening in I guess pre 2020 and post 2020 with the BLM. And that kind of devolved into riots, and then things came out later on to talk about the organization that was popularized at the time, and it just kind of got
Yeah.
real messy. But on the other side, that somehow was the catalyst. Your how do you say, your canon event to springboard you into this I guess this mission. Now
Yeah.
here's where I am, and this is, don't take any offense to this, but I recently discovered that a lot of the individuals that were part of the um, I guess the black young blacks for Donald Trump, Turning Point USA, big conservative network or big conservative group. A lot of those young people went to the White House, got paid like 10K to go, trips, all paid expense, that kind of thing. And they weren't really interested so much in supporting Donald Trump or anything like that. They were just going because it was a paycheck, because it was a free trip, something to do, kind of a
Yeah.
grift, if you catch my drift. And so for me, sometimes I wonder, you're not the exception, although I don't think you're coming at this from a bad place. Was this just kind of an opportunity to say like, hey, you know what? We could make some money doing this. Or was there maybe a conversation with somebody, some friends that you made along the way that was just like, you know what, I really do
Ah,
want to help these people?
that's such a good question, and nobody has ever posed that question to me, and I love that. Like, suss me out, do it. Um, what I realized is that when you feel like shit, you don't have the emotional capacity to give a fuck about being compassionate towards someone else. So, all of the conversations about reform, all of the conversations about like how policing should change and riots and all of these things, I realize that they won't fucking matter if the people who we want to change or in the areas that we want to see progress, if those people aren't up to it.
Mm,
And then I realized, like, and this is just like a human thing. Like when you think about it, like if you have like limited resources and
yeah.
somebody comes knocking on your door that you've never met before, and they're like, "Hey, I need $500." Kiss my ass. You don't care because they're outside of like your immediate priorities. And for the first time I had to really look at them, at police, and be like, well damn, reform cannot mean that it only works for me and it doesn't work for anyone else. Like, especially that, like, when I think about equality, it doesn't involve another group of people being um like oppressed. And really what was happening was a lot of the reform conversations and movements were saying, we want to silence you, we want you out, we want to defund you. And because I had formed all of these, like, very authentic relationships with cops, I realized, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, they have to be a part of the solution as well. So for
Mhm.
me, I kind of came to the table going, I don't know what the answers are because I don't understand policing. Like, I
Yeah.
don't get it, right? Like, I don't have this experience. But what I do know is that if you feel like shit, you're not going to show up to the table willing, flexible, ready to see somebody else's viewpoint. And so,
Yeah.
really, this was kind of like my contribution to the conversation, was saying, well, they also deserve wellness. And in the midst of that, it was that I discovered just how poor the mental health is within the law enforcement community. And it was just like mind blowing to me because none of the friends that I had made were being, they weren't talking about suicide. They weren't talking about having shitty mental health or physical health. So, I realized that this is an area that is going by completely untouched and it's being minimized. I wonder if I can present it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's talk about that first contract, because I assume you had to, you had to do it by contract. You're not just volunteering to walk into the stations and say like,
Yeah.
hey guys, I know y'all don't know me, but can I get like 10 minutes of your time? And like it didn't go down like that, I'm sure. Unless it did, then enlighten us. But that first contract, how did you pitch it, and what was it like standing before, I'm guessing, 5 to 20 officers, and trying to get them to figure this thing out. What was that like? First, start with the conflict.
Well, okay. So I think back up a little bit. So my introduction to cops was by, I worked for a switchblade company and I would go around the country selling switchblades at police conferences.
Nice. What brand
So,
was that?
Ravencrest Tactical.
Okay, cool.
And I would, I was just kicking it and like developing relationships. So I had worked for police from 2013 to 2017.
Mhm.
So I had been just gaining these relationships and being like, people knew me as the knife girl. So there wasn't ever this like political dynamic between us. It was all like, this is what I do for work. These people are super welcoming and loving to me. Like, they seem like I'm kind of edgy. Like, it works really well. So I was building these just very authentic, natural relationships. And then when things really started to hit the fan publicly, like when it came to like riots happening, in Kansas City, like when that stuff was happening, I was like, coupled with what I was starting to learn about myself, it was like, oh my God, like I have to call up my friends. So my introduction to, or me introducing this idea and this concept to people, I've had nothing but open doors because I I had character and integrity along the way and was just building these relationships to where when I pitched the idea like, "Hey, like what do you think about like doing stretching?" Because they saw for years they saw me doing yoga, when class was in session and nobody's hanging like so they just knew me as the knife girl that did yoga. I had like crystals in my bra and shit. Like so it was more like give her a chance, like hear what she has to say. So I've been so privileged in the sense that it's really been like really open doors for me.
Okay, yeah. So those genuine relationships leading to easy conversations and opportunities to pitch your idea and then, of course, implement it. So, what was that first class like? Like, were you scared? Like, what was that like?
No, I wasn't scared at all. I really feel like when I did it, so my first class that I did was in Bakersfield, California for a SWAT group. It was Kern County SWAT. And I was so comfortable because it was just like, these are my guys. Like my buddy Christian Malero, he's the sergeant over the team. And he's what I realized is that wellness, there's so many people who are involved in law enforcement in these like leadership roles that genuinely do care about their people.
Mhm.
So, they brought me in and it was great. Like they had their walls down. I presented them with a bunch of just information and education on how our bodies work. And then once I spent enough time showing them that, they were like primed and ready to get their bodies moving. It wasn't like, oh my God, I absolutely will not do yoga or I will not do any kind of stretching. They were like, oh, this makes sense because now I understand why my body feels the way that it does.
Okay, yeah. No, that makes sense. Now, obviously, as you progress through your career, if this was a video game, as you ascend through the levels, the
Yeah.
bosses get harder, new challenges, new looks for the way how things work. It's like, okay, now we got an opportunity down in Ohio that and it's people we don't know so much, but we
Yeah.
know some of these guys, but really there's new faces. They don't know who I am. I'm this girl who traditionally, at least in the photos and videos that I've seen, you got the big hair, so clearly you're something racially ambiguous person. You're like, wait a minute, who is this person? Why are they telling me that I need to get my glutes right? Why is she looking at my butt? Like, what
Yeah.
have you run into some resistance where it's like, okay, now I gotta try to reach into my bag of tricks to kind of motivate this group because they're not my target audience, or not that they're not your target audience, but they're not what I'm used to.
Not really.
Not
No.
yet.
No. And the reason that I say not yet is because what I'm teaching, you can't avoid.
Hmm.
because I'm not teaching you, I'm not up there talking about politics, I'm not up there talking about reform. I'm
Hmm.
up there talking about you being a human being, you being susceptible to toxic stress, me not asking you your opinion. Right. So one of the things that I got to learn, that I think really gave me the upper hand is all of those years that I was attending police trainings and conferences, I got to go into the trainings.
Hmm.
So I was sitting in major debriefs. I was sitting in wellness trainings, and I was observing how you guys were responding to whatever. I recognized that if the material is not to the point and tactical, if the instructor is not confident and self-aware of what their body is doing and how they're presenting the information, if they look like a trash can, like there's so, like if they're boring, there's all these different things that I picked up on. I started to see your guys's, the crossed arms and the just the short attention spans and the short fuses, and I realized, like, you don't have time. Like, in the wellness world, we do. We have hours on hours to focus on our wellness, to implement new things, and to practice. And I realized, damn, if I'm going to present something, like, I need to present stuff to you that maybe you haven't talked about, but you've thought about, and give you the science and help you connect it. So for me, the areas where I get resistance are typically old heads, people who have been in the police game for 20, 30 years, and they think that the concept of wellness is for a bunch of pussies, and it's like this new wave of police officer that's super soft.
Hmm.
And, like, to give you an example, there was a this older dude. He was part of a wellness unit, and he's like, "Well, we didn't really have we didn't have PTSD back in my day. Like, I've
Hmm.
never had depression a moment in my life." And I said, you know, let's just set those words aside. I would love to know what your blood work looks like, because you may not label something as depression, or you may not label something as PTSD because you're unfamiliar with it, but the body never lies.
Right.
So what is your blood pressure sitting at? What is your gut mobility like? How flexible is your body? Because your mental flexibility is directly connected to your physical flexibility.
Hmm.
So, I really just kind of, I don't even entertain that shit. I just look at stuff like that and I'm just like, okay, cool. We just have different language. Um, I'm just gonna make you try it because you paid me to be here, and then if it doesn't work, cool. But it
Yeah.
does, because it's the human body. We're not all unique and special like we think we are.
Yeah. People, I suppose, everybody's mom told them that they're special. In reality, is most people aren't unique in such a way. Most people have 10 fingers, 10 toes, your
That's what
brain
I'm
has a certain
saying.
pattern. Your doctors are able to treat you and work on you as either a male or a woman based on the template, and the template's pretty much the same, you know.
That's what
So,
I'm saying. So it's like you may not have the language, or you may not have bought into it because maybe the person that was presenting that information you didn't resonate with, and that's
mhm.
fine, but science is still science, and that's why we use it. That's why we can
Right.
depend on it instead of,
Yeah.
like, stigma and myth. Like,
Yeah, and that's where I was maybe like a little bit taken aback when you're reading through the website, and it's like, oh, you were basically inspired to even address some of the, I guess, the reform issues, um, when the BLM, movement was kind of in its, in was it high form? I'm lacking vocabulary today. So that was interesting to me. I was like, okay, a lot of cops, whether they vote, Democrat or Republican, a lot of cops kind of are more like red-blooded American types. At least the ones that I've met. Maybe you've met more, and you can tell me that I'm very wrong.
yeah.
And so I was like, okay, how is she gonna have these conversations? What's the approach? And it sounds to me, based on what you're saying, is you just go in there with the facts. You're not coming with your opinions or a lot of these other things. But do you ever have conversations about reform or anything like that? Like, what does that look
Fuck
like?
yeah. Totally, because here's the thing is, what I've realized is cops want reform more than fucking citizens do. Like cops recognize what bullshit happens with their coworkers at their agencies. And what's really difficult about the conversation and why I think it's so difficult to have like authentic conversations about it is because when it's your community and you feel like you're under attack by
Hmm.
people who don't understand it, you're going to resist whatever they're saying because they don't get it. You don't feel like they understand the nuances and the complexities of it.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, dysfunction is still going on behind the wall. And it's like the people that are suffering the most are the people that are out there on the streets patrolling it. You
Hmm.
know, I just wrote a blog today on like what does officer wellness do? It's the foundation of everything. And the reason that I know that is because of our social media community, people are super candid and they talk shit about, people fucking their CIs and people, having sex with each other and cheating on each other, or people who are stealing money and evidence. Like people call me to consult with them going like, what
Hmm.
do I do? So I hear the stories. Like I mean, my husband's a cop, and just a few months ago, he was working with another agency, and the guy was just like taking things up, just like up a notch, up a notch, up a notch. And my husband does jujitsu, so he's just like chilling. And this guy is just like escalating the situation. He's just like,
Hmm.
dude, slow the fuck down. So it's
This is
like,
a like a police encounter.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's like these things happen, but how do we have a conversation that's not like used to weaponize, the topic at hand? How do we have this discussion and really kind of change things that need to be changed?
Hmm.
And I feel like there just hasn't been a lot of opportunities for that in a public way. I know that police are doing so many things to change how they do business. And unfortunately, that doesn't make its way across that line,
Yeah.
to people who are anti-police or who want to reform police. And I think that because we are willing to have these conversations, we can talk to people on the other side of the line and help them see what police are doing. And then vice
Hmm.
versa, help police see maybe different perspectives. Like, I think it's really, I think it's a really cool little pocket that we've found. And just letting police weigh in on it. But I think before people are willing to weigh in on something controversial, they need to feel safe.
Yeah.
And, that psychological safety where it's okay to be wrong, it's okay to disagree. We're
Hmm.
just talking.
Yeah. I think in regards to law enforcement, security, guys who carry guns for work, that's really, really hard because the amount of opportunities that you can have to be wrong while carrying a gun for work, um, each time you do, it's like playing Russian roulette, and you can't really afford to be wrong, or you might not go home, you know, or you might be drinking
Yeah.
out a tube for the rest of your life. So that when you speak of being in an environment where it's okay to kind of be wrong, it's okay to kind of put your guard down, to not stress. It's one of those things. I was actually driving through one of the backcountry roads, and I got pulled over by some little towns officer, and I mean, that interaction went well, but sometimes it goes across your head. It's like, could this interaction not go so well? Because I'm carrying a gun because I always, that's what I do, but it just makes you wonder because you see a lot of videos, you see all the different things, and you're just like, this could escalate in such a way that I'm not going to be comfortable with. You wonder, but on the other side, you sometimes you say like, okay, how much of that is news and sensationalized nonsense, and how much of it is because we live in the social media age and everyone who can record everybody's dash cam that can be uploaded to the internet within 13 seconds in 4K 120, like just ready to be dissected by all the internet's
Yeah.
lawyers. Like how much, like What's the balance? What have you discovered? That's my question for you. Like, what have you discovered in just doing your research and breaking down just the facts of police reform, the facts of, tension in the bodies of law enforcement officers, and just what happens next? What have you discovered?
That there's a lot of truth out there, and a lot of imagination out there also.
Mm,
There are stories where police officers are using excessive force, but also there are a lot of stories that our parents and our grandparents and our cousins and our friends have told us, or that we've watched on the news, that give us this impression that it happens more frequently than it does. I have never had a situation with a police officer where I was in physical danger, but every time I get pulled over, my body does not know that. Like
right.
I
You have to
I
control
I
your
go through
breathing.
the 100%, dude. Like, I have the stories that, like, my dad and my grandpa taught me, where, like, they were, black kids that were out walking the streets, in South Phoenix in the 70s, and, getting pushed on cars and getting arrested just because 'cause they're out late at night, right? So, my brain goes to those stories that have been, like, implanted in my psyche since I was a little kid, and when I get pulled over, it's immediately like, this is going to happen. Like, something, like, my
Hmm.
rights are going to be violated, and I have to recognize my hands are shaking, my voice is cracking, my eyes are starting to sting, I can't think properly. And I think when both people, the people who are getting pulled over and the people that are making the stop, don't recognize that their bodies are biologically wired for that moment to be away from their cognitive, superpowers, then it kind of leaves you vulnerable. It makes both people a liability. And I think that's what we see a lot on the news, are human beings in these
Hmm.
crisis situations not aware that there are actual steps that you can take within seconds to lower that threat response so
Hmm.
that you can make better decisions.
Hmm.
Um, and I, in my research, there is very little training for police officers for that type of crisis. And what I mean by that is, to prepare for threat, there a lot of drills that involve fitness,
Hmm.
running, burpees, like, how do you exhaust the body so that can't think clearly, and you have to shoot, different targets, and you're
Right.
prone, or you're bend on down on bending knee. um but what we realized is, well, that doesn't quite make the most sense, not when there is cold exposure training that you could implement. So in our
Hmm.
trainings that we do, we bring that in so that our participants can actually experience fight or flight, because
Right.
that's the thing that blinds you. It's not that you're exhausted because you fucking ran. It's, you think that you're going to die. Putting your
Hmm.
hand in cold water, your body's going to think it's going to fucking die. So if you can actually practice what dumb shit comes up in that moment of threat, and you can learn to practice and regulate it in a controlled environment, that is going to translate outside of that.
Hmm.
um so I think that more agencies, fire instructors, really need to, like, harness the power of cold exposure in their trainings.
Yeah. I think I think you're onto something. Something that me and some of my guys who have served overseas and have done other things, have maybe worked in private security, been in a couple gunfights, whether they, actually worked in law enforcement or private security, sector, they often joke and kind of mock some of the civilian tactical training that we get, where it's like, okay, now pick up this rucksack, now carry this big life-size dummy that weighs 200 pounds and just carry that across this thing. Okay, now do the shooting thing. And it's like, how much of that is applicable to this person? Like, how much, some of it's like for fun, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna go to a what do they call that, where you get locked in and you have to find the key? Ooh,
Oh, like
similar
the
to that thing.
escape room?
Yeah, it was like, I'm gonna go to an escape room. It's like, you're not 99% of the time in your life, you're not going to need the skills required to escape an escape room. Like, this isn't Saw. Like, you're going to be okay. But like what you said, there are actual things you can do to simulate that fight, or stimulate your biological response to get those chemicals going, to actually force you into that mode,
Yeah,
so that you can, I guess, get a taste without actually having to have bullets whiz by your face and,
that's right.
experience real death, life and death experiences.
Yeah.
So speak directly to some of the listeners who are interested in some tactical training, are interested in, I guess, becoming more prepared for even encounters with the police where, they're just getting pulled over. How can we be more prepared? I suppose, that getting pulled over. Let's go through that scenario first, just so we don't have to jump back and forth. What are some things that you would recommend for those who maybe you're just a little bit nervous about getting pulled over because you don't like confrontation, and that's kind of a scary thing for you, and you're like, I can't afford this $200 ticket or $500 ticket or points on my insurance, that kind of thing. Like, walk us through that. What should we do?
I mean, I this is what I do myself
Mm,
is the physiological sigh is a really quick breathing technique
mm,
that is regulating the carbon dioxide levels that are in your blood, which allows you to reduce your heart rate within 2 breath cycles of this technique. So I immediately, when I start to notice any type of physiological change in my body, whether that's my body temperature goes up, my face feels flushed, maybe I have to urinate, maybe I'm shaky, maybe I'm experiencing tunnel vision and I can't like seem to focus on something, those are all indicators that my body has crossed that threshold of, okay, I am now fully perceiving threat is here. Um, and also recognizing that when we do cross over that threshold, our cognitive abilities decrease. What that
mm,
means is we are more likely to do something that's completely out of character than if we were in a regulated calm state. So the
mm.
physiological sigh is a long inhale followed by a double inhale. You'll hold the breath for 3 seconds and then you'll exhale slowly. It sounds like this. 2 rounds of that will lower your heart rate, which will increase your ability to think more clearly. So that's the first thing. When you're getting pulled over, like you hear the lights and you're looking for a spot to pull over, you're starting to feel panic. That's the first thing that you can do. You have full control and access over just that one thing. You don't
Mhm.
have control over whether you're going to get a ticket or not. You just don't. You don't have control over how that person reacts, but you can control your body in that moment.
Mhm.
Outside of that, man, I don't fucking know. Like, I know for sure cops don't like it when you lie. Like, my husband is, he's a drug interdictor, and like, it just makes him so angry when people tell him blatant lies. But you know, it happens
Fair
because
enough.
remember, again, though, too, like when you don't have your full cognitive capabilities, you're going to do things that are out of character and you're
Right.
thinking like, how can I preserve myself? Like people lie all the time. Like
Mhm.
it is what it is. So it's, I would just say if you can get your breathing under control and you can start to kind of calm things down, that's always a positive.
Yeah, sounds like you can make some better decisions and at least be in control of your faculties, or at least a little bit more in control. I remember last time I got pulled over, which was more recently than I care to admit. um, I,
I'm still within a year of my last one, so I'm not judging.
hey, you know what? Happens to the best of us, right?
I drive
So,
fast. Oops.
and so my what I do just to make sure that I'm putting myself in the best position to succeed, and not like, there's this meme going around on social media where it's like, quickly reaching for my license and registration so that I don't keep the cop waiting, and he like swings it around and like points it at him like 2 hands forward, and I'm just like, no, don't do that, don't even joke about that, somebody's gonna do it. um and so what I do is actually I keep a fanny pack these days just because I'm cool like that. and I open my fanny pack, which is sitting on the seat next to me. As I'm pulling over, like I delay my pull over by like 0.3 seconds, just enough time for me to do it. And I put it on the dashboard. Phone, where is that? Okay, it's on the console in the middle, on the dashboard. And so, as you know, if he decided to run up to the car and guns blazing, whatever he wants to do, that is what it is. I'm not going to be like, oh, I need to reach behind me and do all the different things that
Yeah.
have been shown to escalate, I guess, that fear response in the guy who's interacting with you, and also putting yourself in a situation where now you're like, ooh, there's conflicting orders. They said get my license, but they also said don't reach behind my back. Conflicting orders. I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
I'm stressed out. What should I do? You know, I don't have to do all that because everything's right there on the dashboard. Nothing that I need is anywhere except for right there. And of course, you might say, okay, well, what about the registration for the vehicle? You should understand what your state requires. Most of the time, it's just going to be the insurance. The insurance, if it's on that vehicle, will kind of intersect, and they don't need any extra stuff. And at that point, if they ask for other stuff, that's yeah, I can't help you with that. I'm just telling you what I do. And so I would have loved that breathing technique at the time, just because it was just like, ooh, I feel the shakiness in my hands even as I'm reaching for my license, and it's slowing me down. I'm pulling out my license, and now I have all three of my licenses. I have multiple, not driver's license, but like handgun, private security, that kind of thing. And I'm just like, screw it, just give them all. And
Right. You're confused. Like
mhm,
that's part of it is your logical thinking is it doesn't matter in a moment of threat. What matters is can you stay alive? Those two, like they're not together. And
mhm,
so we have to recognize that every human being is subject to that same process.
mhm,
Um, and so I think that's really why it's important for cops to practice this stuff is because they don't have the privilege of not getting it right.
right,
Because there's cameras, because you can upload shit in 4K and whatever in a few seconds. And all of a sudden, one single angle is catching them doing something. And maybe that's not really what's happening, or maybe it is. They can't afford it in 2024.
right. Not in today's day and age. And
No.
like what you said, I don't think we want to paint every single person who's ever worn the badge as some good guy, because there's been a few like scumbags who have been caught recently making stuff
Yes,
up.
that's what I'm fucking saying. Like, it's so difficult to address like real shitty cops when you feel like you're under attack. And so I get why it's so difficult for cops to engage in this conversation. And also, there's so many people that have presented reform in such a fucking retarded way that like it just does not make sense. Like I used to think that you could shoot someone in the fucking leg. Like I swear to God,
Yay.
like legit. Okay? So when you hear
Mhm.
people say that, while you're tempted to make fun of them and be like, you're a fucking idiot, if you don't have the experience of shooting on a range, shooting at a target, moving across a field, you won't know that it doesn't work because your frame of reference are movies and you
Oh
laugh,
man.
but
No,
when
it's
we
true
don't
though.
have that
It's
logic
true.
component present, when we don't
Mhm.
have that logic component present, we can only fall back on what we have seen works.
Yeah.
So, I think like it is really unfortunate, but I think that's when we can get people feeling not attacked and feeling safe, then we can ask them questions. And there's so many cops that are willing to have dialogue about like why you can't shoot someone in the leg or why you can't shoot for a smaller mass. But also at the same time, like you said, there are like a lot of recent discoveries of shitty fucking cops. Like
Mhm.
there's both, but there's also shitty fucking black people. There's shitty fucking Mexicans. There's shitty Asian. Like every community has shitty people. And those shitty people get the most traffic and get the most publicity.
Oh
And
man.
people who are outside of those communities go, okay, cool. Now I know that what they're about. And it's
Yeah,
not fair, but it's
it's
life.
it's so frustrating. I swear, if I see one more Instagram video posted by my favorite influencer talking about like, hey, we got to be careful. This is a self-defense scenario. Watch out, and it has a young urban male who happens to be of
He said
African
urban. Oh my
descent,
God.
you know, and then it's like, oh, the usual
He said
suspect,
urban.
right? Urban. Um, the usual suspect or the basketball people or name something that black people like and then just add people at the end so you don't get tagged by the Instagram algorithms and get your account removed for hateful speech, right? People really 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 want to say mean things on the internet that they get creative. I'm like, I don't have the creative juice. Like, I got to do this, I got to do other stuff, but y'all really want to say mean things on the internet. But here's I suppose my overall point is, if that's the only frame of reference that you have, if you have literally one solitary black friend at work and he's kind of a nerdy dude, and every other black person you've ever met is just, or not met, but have that you've seen is either on a movie, on the internet somewhere, on
Yeah.
rap music or something kind of wild like that, and it's just like, oh yeah, this is what this entire group is, and that's not
Yeah.
true. Like, that's
Yeah.
not true at all. Like, I'm here. Like, look at me, right? I mean, I would say look at you, but I don't, you haven't had the conversation. I don't really know what this is, what's going on here.
Like you said, racially ambiguous. I mean, but I think that we give, like, I think that we make it too complicated when it
Right.
comes down to like how far we have evolved as a human species. When we have somebody that's outside of our perceived community, we start asking questions and we start making judgments as a way to try to understand and make sure that we're safe. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that when I'll speak for myself, as a Black woman, I am mixed race. My dad is Black and Native, and my mother is Spanish, Mexican, and Native. And so for me, I grew up with racism. I grew up with people saying really ignorant comments. And then in my adulthood, people saying exactly what you did, where they're looking at me, obviously, because I'm beautiful. And people are like, well, what are you?
It's like, what
And
are you? I'm a human.
it, I know. And I like, my immediate reaction is to take offense, but then I recognize I go against what they're familiar with. Their
Mm-hmm.
exposure to a Black woman is typically this or this. This doesn't fit into how I've categorized that type of person who's different than me. I need to investigate. So
Mm.
I can choose to get defensive, and that is kind of my natural response. But then I have to have the self awareness to recognize what symptoms my body's creating, how far away from my cognitive thinking I'm moving, and what's like my goal and my destination with this person. Depending on what that destination is, I've got to just check myself and realize like, okay, they're probably not meaning it the way that I am projecting.
Yeah.
How can we slow down the pace a little bit and just have a conversation?
Yeah. I do want to just take a quick moment and say that if you are enjoying the conversation, make sure that you hit the like button or hit share, whether you're on the podcast network or on YouTube or wherever you are. Make sure you're sharing our conversations and check the links down below, because there's a couple different people that you can patronize and support, and that supports what we do. Also, in the description, there's a link to a website called Locals. Locals is a private community that we have where we will post this video in its entirety, including a short segment that we're going to have at the end that's a little bit more exclusive to that. I think I'm going to ask our guest about her childhood and why she grew up with such a potty mouth. Like, that's exciting to me, so I'm going to ask about that, and we're going to save that for the private conversation on Locals. Make sure you click the link in the description down below to make sure that happens. All right, back to the show. I see you're laughing. I know that's an exciting conversation. Hard hitting interviews done by yours truly.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So let's I know there's a few things that you said you are, kind of wanted to talk about, and I think we've hit most of them except community engagement. There's a term that goes around. I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit. A term that goes around called community policing, and you might watch like Blue Bloods, which guilty pleasure. Love Blue Bloods. And you see like Jamie, and he's out there shooting hoops with
I
the
don't know what
with
that
the kids.
is.
Oh, it's I guess I don't know. Is it CBS? It's one of those cop dramas, propaganda type shows. At least that's what the people call it. Where it's just this family in New York and the New York City cops. I like the show. Not gonna lie. So um, on the specifically with community policing, you have people saying like, yeah, we got to get out there and make sure that cops are getting to know the communities, that they should live in the communities and whatnot. What are you seeing in that regard? Can you speak to that? I know what you do is kind of specific, but what have you in the research that you've done and the conversations that you've had, does your program address in the reform aspect community policing and how to improve that? Do you have any connection to that?
I mean, yeah, I like to talk all kinds of shit on the internet. So I think, yeah, like if I see fucking coffee with a cop again, like, ugh, okay, stop it. Stop doing coffee with a cop. Stop it. Because you're only interacting with people who fuck with you. That's
Mm,
not that's not the same thing. That's making a fan base. That's making a fan club for you. Like kids
mm,
that want to hop in your patrol car, moms that aren't afraid of you, old people in the community that have questions about fraud. That's not always going to work. That's not something that you can just duplicate and you're like, yeah, this works. In some communities, and you only have like old people or you have people that are like super supportive of police, that's great.
hmm with the little dogs,
So,
and they're walking at night and they're
you
happy.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, here's what I say. I'm going to reference this to the 2A community because that's what y'all are about. How do you feel about people who yell, "We're banning guns. Guns are dangerous. Guns kill people." Does that make you want to tighten things up? Because there's lots of loopholes that shouldn't exist within like within like the world of guns. Like the company that I used to work for, they had an FFL and we got to interact with all kinds of people. We're just like, oh shit. Like I'm also in Arizona where it's like, like we have some very lenient things
Hmm.
happening here. Okay. You would not want someone coming into your community and being like, this is what needs to change when they have zero understanding of the benefits, the positives, the nuances of that thing, and
Hmm.
inviting you into a discussion where they have something to learn from
Yeah.
you. That's what you want it to include. And what I see a lot of police reform being is we're over here as police officers and we're looking at this community that we perceive as this is the issue, this is the issue, this is the issue. Well, this is what we'll do to fix it
Hmm.
without going, I help me understand how 2 generations ago what life was like. Help me understand how things got to where they're at. What do you want to see as change? Like our entire program and its success has been because we've started at the patrol level. So we have the world's largest ongoing data survey of law enforcement officers and cumulative stress. We have like 2,800 responses from across the United States in just one of our surveys. And I looked at all of the data and I'm like, okay, now I know where to put my actual energy and money because that's going to work. This is what they want. So I can look at the overlap of what's important to me, what's important to them, and focus there. Communities that do that, that take the time to ask their communities what the problems are that they perceive, what's your vision for your community, how can we be a part of that, what do we have to learn, those are the places that are successful versus like, well, we're just going to go with this broken window theory and fix up houses because that'll get rid of things. Like it doesn't work in a blanket
Right.
sense. So I think that when you can start to get curious about why things are the way that they are. So like here in Arizona, the Tempe Police Department used to be called the Devil Dogs because after a certain time at night, if you were anybody that had a darker skin color, the police department were like unlawfully pulling people over and making arrests. Like
Wow.
it's historical knowledge, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This was happening in the 50s. That's the age of my dad.
Yeah.
So to not think that those stories, that those traumatic events would not be alive today is, it's really like they're missing these opportunities to really help heal what policing did that they are now having to deal with. Like if you're a cop in 2024, there is a component of your job where you're dealing with things that happened well before you, but you're dealing with the repercussions of them. The way that things
Yeah.
are right now in the state of relationships between police and communities is not because of 2024.
Yeah.
This is something that's gone back. So it's like if we don't ever stop and address like the impact of what the stuff that should not have taken place did, then I think that, I think that change is always going to be short. Or I think that reform is always going to be shortchanged.
It's interesting that you said all that because referencing Instagram again, there's this lady I follow who does like a vocabulary word of the day. It's quite interesting to learn a
I
new
love
word
that shit.
from some random person that I've never met. I'm just like, I feel smarter. Yeah.
You should. Your brain
Right.
needs that. I love those
Right.
vocabulary pages.
But she did something interesting for, I guess, to kick off Black History Month. She went to one of the local PDs and just basically in front of the police department, in front of all the cars parked out front, she talked about slave catchers, which many people will reference as the true origin of United States law enforcement agencies.
Yeah.
And you referenced like, hey, people in the past don't necessarily you're not necessarily guilty for the sins of somebody who was in your profession 50 years ago, although if you continue some of the habits, people will look at you sideways, and maybe rightly so. And I don't think you said exactly that, but I'm adding on. So
Yeah.
she referenced the slave catchers, and I'm just like, how tough would that be to be a part of that police department, run across this lady's video, and basically feel like you either have to defend yourself or dismiss her,
Yeah.
carte blanche for saying like, hey, your profession originated from slave catchers, whether that's true or not. And the science says it is true, but or the historical facts says it is true, but that's not you. Probably,
Right.
probably, and I think it's not quite fair, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a little cringe.
I agree. I agree. Like it's but here's why you have to, I think that cops need to have the confidence and the courage to be like, that was fucked up. And also, that's not me.
Hmm.
It's both. It's not right for people who are outside of the community to constantly demonize police officers and say that they are those people who did those things. And also, like you said, we have to investigate and find out what are the practices that still exist that did not stop or that have like slowly evolved but still have a tinge or a hint of those things.
Right.
Like when I did my simulation, I walked out and I was like, holy shit. Holy shit. I think that what people view as racism or bias is really like our trauma response to a like threat that happens within those milliseconds. We
Hmm.
have this long history of seeing police officers shooting, and so to see them shoot, automatically our brains go to, oh, it must be that.
Mm.
And I'm like, whoa, I think that we're making it too complex in some areas and we're making it what it's not. And it is really unfortunate. So if you don't have the bravery to actually have those conversations and be like, that was fucked up. And also, I'm not that fucking racist dickhead. And like, also, these are the things that we're doing to improve the community. And also, here's the things that your community is doing that is the same fuck shit as then. Like, we're never going to see progress. Like, we talk about white privilege or we talk about police racism, but we won't talk about Black victimhood and generational, like, fuck shit that happens within communities. And it's like, if none of us are going to be honest, we're not going to come up with an honest, sustainable solution. We
Yeah.
have to figure shit out. Like, it's not just the cops that have to change.
Yeah, it's really tough because especially when we start talking about specifically Black issues, um, you have like two polar opposites. So you have like the Candace Owens, and then you have
Who's
name
Candace
literally.
Owens?
Oh my gosh! Wow, you're out of the loop. She's a Black commentator who generally, historically, has been extra harsh towards the Black community as a whole, such as saying like, "Hey, George Floyd wasn't a hero," that kind of conversation, which we can get into the details of what kind of life Mr. George Floyd lived, but to more or less imply that man deserved what he got, like I don't enjoy that kind of conversation. I think that you're kind of a shallow human being, if not a bad person. I'm conflicted because I know some people are ignorant, and oftentimes you should not attribute malice to things that it can easily be chalked up to blatant stupidity. But there comes a point where I'm just like, hey, yo, like that's cruel and unusual, and I think you need help. Like, seek help.
Okay.
Yeah,
And this is the Candace Owens person?
yeah, yeah. You should look her up. Sometimes she's
I
right, but a
mean,
lot of the time she's wrong. You know?
I think that, like, I think that people who are like that, I feel like I know who you're talking about. Like, does she have like short hair?
Yeah, yep. Darker
So
complexion. Yeah,
I think what is really retarded about people who approach things like that is you're minimizing just how strong of a current our generation, like, the communities that we grow up in, the circumstances that we're born into.
hmm,
We're really minimizing how our systems fail us, let us down,
hmm,
especially people who are poor, especially people who are minority communities. I think we really fucking minimize just how I don't want to say the word oppressed, but like, we're not all starting off on the same line. So it's
yeah,
it's minimizing people's experiences by being that way. I think that we have to look back at our histories and recognize. I was just listening to a Rogan podcast with this dude that went to prison for like 20 something years.
hmm,
He was guilty, he did it, and he just kind of talked about his life and the circumstances that he was raised in that got him ultimately in prison because he committed a crime. And it's
yeah,
like, it's easy to look at that situation and be like, it's easy to look at George Floyd and be like, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, well, hold on a second. What were the circumstances that person was born in? Are we willing to look deeper and farther back and understand more before we just open our fucking mouths? Like, there's a book I have, it's on the American tradition of violence, and it's the Basket family. And it is this guy that in the 70s was like one of the most brutal murderers that like ever existed. I want to say it was like in Rikers Island. And this journalist started interviewing this person and was able to like track his genealogy or his lineage and realize that he came from this long line of violent men who it started when um, his ancestor was brought over from Africa, and they isolated this person and basically trained him to be a human killing machine.
wow,
And as the generations went forward, ending up in the 70s, this kid who is just full of malice and discontent, it's like, well, shit, it's all wrong. The action shouldn't be taking place. Yes. And also, let's look to find out where this person's coming from and why they are the way that they are, why they do that.
yeah, yeah.
So,
And
I don't know.
I think the word that we're seeking, or one of the words, is personal accountability, but also like big picture, macro perspective. Like,
Ah,
what is the environment? I worked in a school for a few. I guess it was like a year, a school for kids with intellectual and emotional disabilities. Some of them had, certified letters that said like, "Ooh, this person has, ADHD, ADD," but also this kid has been suspended from school 19 times, and they're done with
Mm-hmm.
him. So he's here, and if he goes hands on, put him in a restraint and put him in that room, and he's not coming out.
Right.
That kind of situation.
Right.
And it was probably, of the dangerous jobs that I've had, yeah, it's probably like top three. Like they said, like, hey, in doing these restraints, there is a percentage chance that you could die. So be careful, okay? And you're like, oh, okay, cool. How much am I getting paid to do this? Not enough, but I'll do it because I need the money. Point being, I just want to make sure we get back on top. I do this. Point being is some of these kids, like over extended holidays, you would make so much progress with them throughout the week. Some of the sweetest little kids you ever met. Like, okay, this kid kind of cusses. He kind of gets mad if someone, cheats in a video game we're playing after school or whatever. He's gonna knock the other kid out. We're making progress. He's kind of getting to a point where he can control himself a little bit more. He's not snapping. He's not stealing snacks. He's not, all weird little stuff. And then he goes home for a 3-day weekend, and he comes back and he's just wired. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
He's off his meds. Like, oh wait, you found out that his parents actually opened up the medication capsule and stole the important component and then put it back together, and now he's taking meds that don't work because it's missing the important piece. I don't know the technical term for it. Regardless of how anyone feels about medicating children, some people in those situations, they may be better off. That said, if you're in that environment, or this white kid that I worked with, I can't say his name due to HIPAA. I want to say his name so bad. I'm gonna call him Jack. Jack, he was removed from his home. One of the circumstances of his removal was when he was probably 8 or 9. He actually witnessed his mom would put him in the closet, and he witnessed his mother engaging in prostitution. And then one of the reasons why he got picked up is for a weed charge, something small. He was leaving a McDonald's. A cop kind of picked him up. He dresses really, really hood. Like he's wearing a hoodie, baggy pants. Drawers are showing. Like kind of like, don't do that, bro. You're gonna get ID'd real fast. And he ditched a bag before the cops intercepted him. They found the bag, weed in the bag. Okay, now we got to pull you out of your home, investigation, that kind of stuff. And the one day he came, here I'm looping around the story. One day he comes back to school. He's wearing a brand new hoodie. He's in foster care at this point. He's wearing a brand new hoodie, brand new Gucci belt. I'm like, man, what's going on, bro? Like, where'd you get that? How much was that? It was free. What you mean? Where'd you get it? From the mall. Oh, okay. So we're going to the mall and stealing stuff. Okay. Like I've never shoplifted in my life, so I don't even know what that's like. But to see this kid, you know, nice kid. He's very respectful. If you're just having a great conversation with him, you could get along with him. Like you guys would be friends. But
Because we cuss
he,
so much.
because we got so much. Exactly. That's the only reason. Um, but he's lost, and it
Yeah.
didn't happen overnight. Like it didn't happen just
Right.
because of one little thing. And in some ways, it's not his fault. But in other ways, it is his fault, and he will be held
Right.
accountable
It's
for every decision.
both. It's both. And I think that that's the part where, like, when people ask me like what I think about reform, I'm like, I don't have the answers. I
Yeah.
don't know. But what I do know is that if we can't just start small with, do we feel well? And can we look back at the past? Then I do know that our answers are not going to be sustainable, authentic, and meaningful. So, like with that kid, that's exactly it. You grow up in a house where your mom's a prostitute and you're watching her. You have to build anger in your body because that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a learning disability, the educational system is not built, unfortunately, for people who think differently or who have trouble learning. So then, like, where does that put him? And
Yeah.
and then if he doesn't have access to his needs, children don't have fully formed brains until the
Mm-hmm.
age of 25. Like, our job as parents of teens is to be their prefrontal cortex, their cognitive thinking, because they don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
So if the person that's supposed to do that thinking for them is not doing that for themselves, then it's like, well, damn, we can't really blame that person for arriving at where they did.
Yeah.
but also they do have to be responsible because there are certain parameters within our society. So I don't know the answer. It's just more complex than this person is a fuckhead and,
Yeah.
I'm right.
Yeah. Shoot. I mean, I'm thinking of another scenario where this another white kid I was mentoring, out different job. It was a paid mentorship job where we got contracts with the state, DJJ, DSS, and he was with a foster family. The foster family that he was with was getting him right. Like he was going to school. He was removed because he was truant. Like he was not attending school. He missed like 100 days or something like that. Something crazy. It's like, how is that possible? I don't know. And eventually, he was actually put back with his original family, his biological mother and father. I attended sessions with the therapist and whatnot, just trying to make sure we're growing together. And come to find out, this kid's playing a video game and he's playing video games and having a good time, but he can't read. Like I gave him like kid level books, like Dr. Seuss, some Spider-Man comics, cannot read to save his life. Some words, but he's got to sound them out one by one. I'm like, bro, you're 12 years old. What are you talking about? You're a 12-year-old kid who goes to school. How? And he when he went back with his parents, he was actually removed again because he started missing school all of a sudden. He's, oh, I was sick
Right, because why would
today.
you
I was
go?
late. Just like randomly. And the judge was like, "Nah, we're not doing this again." And so they uprooted his life, sent him to another home, not the original home that he was doing well in, another home outside of the city. And now he's in a situation where if he becomes a drug lord kingpin or something like that, I'm just like, okay, villain origin story. Like this is what happens. Like we
Yeah,
uprooted
like
his
if
life
you can't
twice.
fucking that's right. If you can't read, why are you going to keep going to the school when like obviously you cannot excel? You're going to
Yeah.
feel dumb. You're going to feel like you're going to feel ashamed. You're going to
Yeah.
feel uncomfortable. All of those like emotions that we even as adults who abide by the
Mm-hmm.
law do our best to avoid. I I cheated on my ex-husband because I did not want to sit with uncomfortable emotions. Okay, we do all kinds of things
Mm.
to get away from that stuff. And then it's like, well, damn, like if this person gets processed through the judicial system and all of a sudden they're presented with legal paperwork and this individual cannot read and they're just agreeing to a plea, like we're
Wow.
not thinking about just how impactful people's circumstances are,
Mm-hmm.
which is why so we have a brand new survey that we're doing right now, and it is we want to get about 1,000 different responses from law enforcement and first responders asking them about the ACE test. It's called Adverse Childhood Effects. You can find it on our website under our tacmobility.org/resources. You'll see under our surveys. The ACE test is a 10-question test asking you various things that happened to you before the age of 18. And depending on how high of a score you get out of 10, the increased likelihood of later things in your adulthood, whether that's obesity, chronic illnesses, multiple sexual partners, STIs, drug use, domestic violence. And it's because as we're young and our bodies are exposed to toxic stress when our bodies are developing,
Mm.
we begin to go down this dysfunctional path of building our body rather than a functional path of growing our body. But also, I think it's really good information to know where we've been because then you can kind of look at your life and go, on paper, I'm supposed to be a statistic. That's not going to be me. I'm not going to do those things because my body is biologically wired to do that stuff. Like,
Mm.
my childhood, I grew up very low income. I was molested when I was a kid. I was raised in a cult. Like there's so many things that happen in my life that should leave me as a statistic. And I refuse. So I think when people can realize their origin stories and where they're coming from, they can have compassion for the things that are happening to their bodies, maybe the situations that they find themselves in, but also use that as a guide out of it.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Erica, this has been a crazy conversation. Like it kind of got interesting at the end, and I am going to continue it over on our private feed locals. So pretty much I'm just going to end the stream here. We're going to continue over there. It's the pinned link for those of you who are watching live, the pinned link in the live chat. And if you are listening via podcast and you're like, oh shoot, where's the rest of the conversation? Jump over to, I guess, the show notes. It's like the first link in there. Just tap in there. There's a way you can be able to enjoy it all for
tap
free.
in.
Okay, Erica, come on. Anyways,
you don't
so
know that
make sure
song?
I know the song. Okay.
Okay, I was like, stop it.
No, I know the song. Anyways, Erica, please, first of all, before we even say like, hey, how can people find you? Like, tell people anything like you need to let them know. I know you just said there's a survey that you want people to tap in with. What should people know about you before we go?
I'm a real ass bitch. I don't know. I just feel like I can feel that 2024 is going to be different for people's health, and I want to be a part of that any way that I can. And I just want people to roll through Instagram and say, hey, join our wellness community, join in on conversations that not a lot of people want to have. Tell me what your experiences have been like. Teach me something. Let me teach you something. Let's be friends.
Awesome. Well, guys, make sure that you are tapping in with us over on Locals. This has been a really, really fun conversation with Erica. We're not leaving yet. We're going to continue on for just a few more minutes, but I want to thank you guys. My name is Aaron, and of course, this has been Costly Conversations. You make sure to keep it costly.